Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully, you have a lovely day out and restful time after work. I would like just to start introducing myself. My name is Bara Yousef, clinical specialist in Sultan Abdulaziz Humanitarian City. I'm working at pediatric unit. Also for visual processing, like visual perceptions, visual motor integrations, as well for the visual screening. Started getting some standardized assessment for cognitions and visual processing, started from the simple assessment to more specialized and intensive assessment. We have different assessment for the different age group of the children's. Some of the assessment is general for the cognition, some is specialized like for attentions. Also knowing our anatomy and physiology, it helps you to make sense of the problem experienced by patient with the cognitive impairment. Then this information, you're gonna use it to explain to the patient and the parent, because for sure they're gonna ask you. You need to explain to them that the damage that caused the problem is located in the brain. And the patient doesn't get that. They think the problem on their arm or their leg. The patient need to understand that everything they have, the emotions, the drive, the cognitions, the motor, the sensory, it's all from the brain. They need to understand and get that. And understand what is their problems and from where it's arise, they become aware of their problem. This is the key point of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, is the patient awareness. They should be aware of their problem, and we're gonna talk about it later when we talk about the metacognition. I think also when we explain to the patients, they will be aware that the problem they are experiencing has a cause and not their fault. If some of the stress and tension they have. So this is in general why we need to be aware with the basic anatomy and physiology of the brain when we talk about the cognition. Let's talk now about the basic anatomy and physiology of the brain, and this is sound knowledge, because if we talk in details, it's gonna take about months or maybe weeks or maybe days. The brain look like? Who can answer that? The brain look like what? The brain is very soft and it has more liquid property than the solid property. And this make the brain what? Can you answer? Look here, we can see that the brain is wrinkly and it's look like the walnut. But why is the brain is wrinkly? Why? It's wrinkly because it's very large. The surface area of the brain is about 4 sheets of paper. Can you imagine this big size is sitting in the small box, which is the skull? About the consistency of the brain, the property of the brain. Did we ask ourselves? Because this is very important, the implication in the cognitive rehabs and when we deal with the patient. It's very important. The brain very easily damaged and very susceptible for damage from the car accident, from the trauma, from the falling, etc., etc. The brain weight and the size. Who knows how much the brain is weight? Who knows? Adult human brain is about 3 pounds. Added to the skull weight is about 7 pounds. This is quite heavy weight sitting in your neck muscle. Also has some contribution why we have some damage of the neck muscle, sprain, strain in many of the accident we have. Size of the brain increase by the age. What do you think? When the brain stop growing? Our brain is sitting in the box. What the name of that box? Is the skull. The skull is like a protector for our brain. This area, in case of the accident, it's become damaging to our brain when the brain is hit by this area. Does the skull always protect us? The answer is no. Because there is a certain area inside the skull where the bone is very sharp. Area you will find it here near or next to the orbital area. There is also the sphenoid bone, and there is also another area in the parietal. This area, in case of the accident, it's become damaging to our brain when the brain is hit by this area. Let's see together what's exactly happened in the accident, especially during acceleration decelerations accident, which is called crash brain damage. In case of the acceleration deceleration accident, our brain and our skull become 2 separate things. Remember when we talk about the brain property, it has more liquid property than the accident happened. As you see here in the picture, the skull is moving quickly forward while the brain is still behind and moving very slowly. And this is then the skull is moving back while the brain is still in stationary or maybe moving forward, and this is also cause damage the brain from other area. The skull is moving backward while the brain is still moving forward, and also this is cause more damaging of the brain in those area whereas the skull is very sharp, which we just talking about. So this is the mechanisms of the acceleration, deceleration when we hit by car or when we are standing and hitting. Actually, by age of the 2 years, the brain is about 80% of the adult size, and the brain stops growing at about 18 years old. Of the brain is not increasing, instead it's become more mature, as you see here in these pictures with the different age group of the brain. It's become more mature. In stem we have the cerebrum, and as we know, all the cerebrum has two hemispheres, the right and the left. But is there a significant difference between these two? You think from the cognitive standpoint? Can you ask yourself? Look at these pictures. We can see in the right hemispheres the people is playing, in the picnics, taking photographs, etc., etc. The people in the left hemisphere is studying, sitting in the office and maybe doing something. In the left hemisphere it's more logicals, analyticals and processing. The left hemisphere is templating, organizing, processing and putting all the informations in the order. So this is the function of the left hemisphere. To know that, it's very useful to know that each piece of the information, it comes first to your right hemisphere, then it's go to the left hemisphere. What does that mean? It means that the right hemisphere is more visuospatial, holistic and involved in the new learning process. It's relevant to know that, especially when you do or when you deal with such patient who has maybe either right or left hemisphere damage, so you can estimate what is the problem or assume. The right and the left hemisphere is connected with each other and talking with each other through an area. It's called the corpus callosum, as you see here. And this area, it's very important with it transferring the new emotions from the right to the left hemisphere and then processing these emotions. Relevant info maybe you need to know about that this area is more rich and more wider in the female brain than the male brain. What does that mean? It means that the processing of the emotions, transferring the emotion in the female brain is more than the male brain. You can see the difference between the male and the female with the understanding, remembering, processing the emotion and dealing with the emotion. So this is a fact. Another very important area you need to know about in the brain, which is the cerebral cortex. This is the conscious area of our brain. Here the cerebral cortex is different lobe, frontal, parietals, occipitals and temporal. And these names come from the Latins or the Greek name. They was naming this area in how it was look like, not based on the function when they started the anatomy and the physiology. Cortex is very strange word, and again this is the conscious area of our brain. So any info should go from the subcortical to the cortical area to become conscious. Just when we talk about the cognitions and term of the cognitions, I want you just to remember one key word for each lobe of the cerebral cortex. Frontal lobes, which is involved in the organizing, planning, emotional and behavioral perceptions. Then the parietal lobe, which is involved more in the occipital lobe, which is the visual or the optical area of the brain, and the temporal lobe, which is more involved in the memory. Quite a few things in the frontal lobe, which is very important area in the brain. When we talk about the emotions, this area is normalizing, modulating, inhibiting our emotion, which is started from the limbic structures. The emotion started from the subconscious area, then the. So if we have damage on this area, what happened to the patients? The emotion, the drive, the sexual behaviors also, it's not inhibited and become dominant. You can see that in those patients you see a lot of the behavioral problems, and they cannot control it and they are not aware with it because of the damage or problem. Another area, which is the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, which has many role in the motor coordinations and the planning. So you need to remember that. Also, you need to be aware as a therapist that the cerebellum and the basal ganglia is significantly involved in the cognitions and also in the language. Going a bit microscopic and talking what is going on and what is happening in the microscopic levels of the brain. Our brain is consist of the 1 billion neurons. That's about 166 time number of the people in the earth. It's relevant to know that all the neuron is connected with each other, and it's releasing an ions which is make an electrical signals, and this is electrical signal. These signals are transferring the informations in our body. So remember, we are chemicals and electricals. This is in general about the basic anatomy and physiology of the brain, which is relevant to the cognitive function. I hopefully it was informative, valuable for you. And inshallah we will see you in the next lecture to talk more about the principles, criteria, approaches of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Thank you all. Have a good night. Hello again and good afternoon everyone. Again, my name is Bara Yousef, clinical specialist in Sultan Abdulaziz Humanitarian City. I'm working at pediatric unit. So today we'll continue and complete our topics, which is introduction about cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Last time, if you remember, we have talked about the basic anatomy and physiology of the brains. We have mentioned why we need to be aware with the basic anatomy and physiology of the brain in the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. We also talk about why it's important to us, why it's important to the patients. We're going to throw some facts, numbers about the brains. Also, we have discussed some of the anatomical structures of the brains and also the implications in the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So we discuss it from the cognitive rehab standpoint and what happened in case of damage of that area, how it's affecting the cognitions and the patient's also performance. So today we'll continue in our topic. Our topic today will be about the primary principles, criteria of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So let's start with this topic, which is very interesting topic. We will try to summarize it to make it clear for you as much as possible, and if there is any questions, if there is any concerns, any issue, you can ask it to me. Okay. So our topic for today will be an introduction to cognitive rehabilitation therapy. We're gonna discuss the important principles, criteria for the cognitive rehab therapy. This is a very big topic, but I will try to summarize it to highlight the important point for you, which gonna help you in your practice and how to approach the patients, how to use the cognitive rehab therapy principles. So when we talk about the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, the first thing we need to know what we mean with the cognitions. If I ask you a question, what do we mean with the cognition? What does cognition mean? I'm sure all of you will say different words, different maybe terms to describe the cognitions, because this is like an umbrella which is including a lot of domains, a lot of category. Some of you will say maybe attentions, memory, reasoning, learning, thinking, information processing, so etc. So there is a lot of words which can describe the cognition. But if we try to summarize it, if we try to summarize the term cognition in 2 words, what does this word mean? We can say cognition mean thinking and learning. So this is what we mean with the cognition. These 2 terms, it is underlie and superlie a lot of terms, a lot of skills, but again, thinking and learning, it can describe the cognition. So if cognition is thinking and learning, so what do we mean with the cognitive rehabilitation therapy? What does that term mean? Cognitive rehabilitation therapy, it is the retaining the thinking and learning skills which was maybe altered or lost secondary to the congenital or acquired brain impairment or damage. So as based on the cognitive rehabilitation therapy associations in the North America, cognitive rehabilitation therapy, it's defined as the process of relearning cognitive skills that have been lost or altered as a result of damage to the brain cells chemistry. And if a skill cannot be learned or relearned, then the new ones have to be taught to enable the person to compensate for their lost and cognitive function. So there is some keywords on this in this definitions. that the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, it can be used with the patient of acquired brain damage like the stroke, TBI, like the brain tumors or trauma or anything that's acquired and affect the brain, sometimes degenerative diseases or neurological diseases. It can also be used with the congenitals, which is not acquired, like the patient who has cognitive delay, like we have a lot of children with the learning disability, which is secondary to the maybe cognitive delay, some of them cerebral palsy, some of them developmental delay, etc. So we can use it with both type of patients, cognitive congenitals and the acquired brain damage. Another thing which is underlined this term or these definitions, that the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, it can be learning or remediation process to improve particular or specific skills. At the same time, if that skill cannot be remediated or restored, we can so move to another strategy, which is the compensation. So we can use remediations or compensation. We're gonna talk about this in the next part when we talk about the approaches. Okay, so another also, when we talk about the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, it can be described as the process of improving functions and the quality of life in those individuals living with the cognitive and perceptual impairment. So this is basically what do we mean with the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. I just want you to understand what does this term mean and which cases it can be used with, and what is the two principles of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, which we mentioned, the process or the remediations and the compensation. We're gonna talk about it in details later. Okay, so this is about the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Now, how can I improve patient life by using CRT? By the way, when I use the term CRT or when I use CRT, it means cognitive rehab therapy. So this abbreviation was identified by the Cognitive Rehabilitation Therapy Associations in the North America. Even it's used also in the UK models, the CRT. So this is like a unified terms or abbreviations. It's used to describe the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So can I improve the patient life by using CRT? Of course, yes. How? Cognitive rehab, it offers retraining in the ability to think, use judgment, and make decisions. It's also enhanced the person's capacity to process and interpret information and to improve the person's ability to function in all aspects of family and community life. Also, it's concerned with the cognitive problem caused by neurological deficits or aging process. So there is many of the goals which can be achieved, and also it's contribute directly or indirectly on the patient quality of life. So cognitive rehab therapy, it can be useful and relevant to the patients. It's improve particular area in the patient life. Now, what's different? I just want you also to differentiate and to be aware whenever you read about the cognitive rehab therapy or about the cognition in general, to be aware with the different terms, because there is different terms which is almost similar in spelling when we talk about the cognitions, but this term, it's a bit confusing, but it's relevant to differentiate and to recognize what is the difference between these terms. We have the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, which is the CRT. We have another terms, which is the cognitive behavioral therapy, the CBT, and we have the cognitive enhancement therapy, which is the CET. So these terms you see or you read whenever you read maybe some literatures, maybe books, maybe an articles, any publications which is related to to cognition in general. So this term, again, it is almost similar, but there is a key difference and significant difference between these terms, that the cognitive rehabilitation therapy is not be confused with the cognitive behavioral and cognitive enhancement therapy, because cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive enhancement therapy is form of psychotherapy that emphasize the role of the thought patterns in moods and behaviors and deals with the mental health issue. So basically, cognitive behavioral and cognitive enhancement therapy, it's mostly dealing with the patients of the mental health or mental illness, and it's using more behaviorals and neuropsychological principles and approaches. So this is the primary difference between these terms. Okay. Now if we move to another topic, what is the cognitive skill I want to improve? What is the cognitive skills which you know and you want to improve in the patients? Maybe you will say a lot of skills. Some of you will say maybe memory, some of you will say maybe attention, some of you will say maybe information processing, some will say maybe reasoning, learning, thinking, etc., etc. Maybe visual perceptions, processing. So we have almost about 20 cognitive skills which we are using in our daily life. But if we wanna categorize these cognitive skills, which is many, can we categorize it? Can we fit it in maybe in domains or modules, which is like an umbrella underlie all of these cognitive skills or cognitive category? So if we classify or categorize all the cognitive skills which we have, we can categorize it or sort it under specific domains. These domains, which is attention, memory, visual processing, information processing, and executive functions. I also include the social communications because in US models also they include the social communications under the cognitive modules and the cognitive domains. So this is the primary domains of the cognitions. Again, attention, memory, visual processing, information processing, and executive function. So this heading, it can fit for all of the other skills. So whenever we use any skills or any cognitive skills with the patients, it can be fit under any of these heading or any of these modules. Okay, so this is again the cognitive modules. So if we look to this pyramid, and the pyramid is a good way to explain and to talk about these cognitive domains, because the pyramid, it's go in hierarchy. What does that mean? It means that we have a base. So we have a fundamental level, we have a basic level, we have foundational level. And in the cognitions, our fundamentals and our foundational level and the base of the cognition is the attentions. So all the other aspects or all other category, it can be built over the attention. So we gotta go in hierarchy. So we build the attentions, then after that we go to the visual and information processing, then we proceed to the memory, and finally to the executive functions. In the previous models, on the previous theory, the executive functions, as we know, it was at the top of the pyramid, but doesn't mean that the executive function is not also involved in other aspect of the cognitive level. So in each level of the treatments, we're gonna include the executive function. So we can still also include the executive function when we do attention training and visual processing training and memory training. So, but again, when we go in hierarchy, we need also to build this category in each other. Okay, so this is again about the cognitive models and the cognitive pyramid. Now we have another terms which mean the metacognitions. The metacognition. What does the metacognition mean? So if we said the cognitions is the thinking and learning. So what is the metacognition? Metacognition is something which is exceed, which is beyond, which is superior to the cognitions, which we call it the metacognition. So the metacognition, it comes from the root word meta, meaning beyond, and the cognitions about cognition, thinking about thinking, or knowing about knowing. So again, metacognition, it is superiors and beyond and exceed the cognitions. Under the metacognitions, we have two categories, which is the self-awareness and the self-regulations. Self-awareness, which is awareness of yourself, awareness of your skills, awareness of your ability, awareness of your weakness with your strength. So this is all about the the self-awareness. I'm aware with my strength. I can talk about this topic. I cannot talk about this topic. I have skill in this part. I cannot do in this part. I can also observe my behaviors and do self-regulation for myself. I can monitor myself if I'm angry, if I'm happy, if I'm maybe sad. I can also observe the others and monitor their behaviors. I can also do adaptation, modification, adjusting my behaviors. So this is what we mean with the metacognition. This is the controlling of yourself, monitoring yourself, regulating yourself. So this is basically the metacognitions. And you can see how much is related to the executive functions, the metacognitions. And when we talk about the executive function in details, you see that we are using a lot of the metacognitive strategies to improve the executive function of the person. By the way, the term metacognition, it came from the special education field, while the executive function, it came from a neurological and neuropsychological field. It's just to be aware. So again, if we look at this pyramid, we have this category. So where is we fit? Where is we need to fit the metacognition? Where it should be fit? So shall we put the metacognitions between maybe the memory and the executive function? Shall we put it in the top of the pyramid? Shall we put it in the above the attention? So where we should fit the metacognitions? Again, we adjust the pyramid, and we have here the oval shapes, whereas the metacognitions is surrounding. So metacognition is surrounding all the area of the cognitive functions. What's that mean? It's mean that whenever you work with the patient on any of the cognitive modules or any of the cognitive skills, you shouldn't forget the metacognition. Should be involved in all the aspect, should be involved in all the level of the patient journey. So when I work in the attention, I should include the metacognitions. When I work in the visual processing, memory, information processing, executive function, I should include the metacognition. This is mean that you should work consistently in the patient awareness to improve his awareness, self-awareness, self-regulations in all the level of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So please remember that. We have added also another 2 arrow, where is the psychosocial function. And this is sense because we cannot separate the patient or the person emotions from his cognitive function. Our emotions, our feeling, it shouldn't be separated from our cognitive skills because it's connected and overlap with each other. And this is sense because even for us, when we was maybe anxious or when we was at stress last time, our cognitive functions and our memory, our attention is not was as when we was relaxed or when we was calm. So it was not as the same. So this is how the cognitive function, it is highly involved and impacted by our psychosocial function. So this is very important also. Okay, so then remember, if you are teaching wrong type of strategy at wrong stage of awareness, you are wasting your time. So awareness again is very important, which means metacognition is very important in each aspect of the treatment whenever we do cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Okay, now which area of the patient I have to consider in CRT? Which area of the patient I have to consider? Okay, can you also answer this question? To answer that, I will just show you 3 scenarios, and you need to select the best scenario, like which area I should to consider it whenever I do CRT with the. So let's see together the 3 scenarios. This is the first scenario. You can read it. This is the second scenario. And this is the third scenario. I think you notice the difference between the 3 scenarios. It's very clear. when we talk about the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, we should focus in the impairment level and also in the functional and participation level. So my goals is not only to improve the memory in the tabletop activities or in the paper-based activities. I want to improve memory that enable patient to remember his daily life activities, his daily routine activities, his maybe homework, his schoolwork. So this is our ultimate goals from the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So as you see in the third scenario, that the impairment was detected in the impairment level as per the standardized assessment and also in the functional level. And this is our ultimate goals whenever we do cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So this is one of the home message of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Okay. So now let's talk about the approaches. We have 4 approaches was identified to be used in the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. These 4 approaches is, we have a process training, we have strategy training, we have functional activity training, and we have education. So whatever you do with the patient, it should be fit under one of these approaches. You can, by the way, do all the approaches together, 1 or 2 together as one only, but this is the major approaches in the cognitive rehabilitation. So let's talk briefly about these approaches, because we're gonna take maybe one day to talk about it in details. I will just summarize the important and highlight the important point related to these approaches. When we talk about the education, which is the first level of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, you need some time to think or to see yourself as a teacher, not anymore as a therapist whenever you work with the patient and do cognitive rehab therapy. Because cognitive rehabilitation, as we mentioned earlier, and when we define the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, it's like a teaching and learning strategy. So you should have some learning and teaching skills in order to be good cognitive rehab therapist. I'm going to talk about some of these teaching skills at the end, but this is in general, the education is the baseline. You need to educate the patient, you need to educate the family, and improving the awareness also, as we mentioned, this is key. This is a key and core of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy, which can be increased by using the educations. So education again is very important level in the cognitive rehab therapy, and this is the first approach. The second approach, which is the process training. In process training, we are focusing in the remediating the lost cognitive skill. So I'm gonna focus in remediating and restoring the memory, the attentions, the information processing by using like tabletop activities, by using paper-based activities. But again, we are focusing in the impairment level. So I'm remediating the loss of the skills. I'm not compensating again. I'm remediating the skill which was being lost. So remediation component of the cognitive skill underlying all function, and younger children with the congenital impairment more effective with the acute impairment. So remember, with the acute stage and with the younger children, using process training is more effective. Also called sometimes restorative or transfer training approach, and we're using deficit specific cognitive and perceptual training activities with choosing based on the pattern of the impairment. So this is basically what we mean with the process training. Process training also consider a key strategy whenever we do cognitive rehabilitation therapy, and we are using a lot of the process training with the patient, but you need to remember if it's effective or not effective with the patient, because you shouldn't lose your time using this strategy. We have many examples of the process trainings, like using the puzzles, like using the cancellation task, using maybe the pictures or to improve the memory, using maybe in-back technique to improve also the attentions. So we have many strategies, and we have different activities. I'm sure all of you is using to improve specific skills related to the cognitive, and this is the process training. Okay, so our goal to manage the slowness of the mental processing, because in process training we are improving the processing of the informations. So this is one of our primary goals, to manage the mental slowness. By the way, there is also some strategies we've been used to improve the processing of the informations and to reduce the mental slowness. Like one of the strategy, we call it time pressure management. This is an evidence-based strategy being used with the patient who has mental slowness and information processing problem. So again, we need to improve the mental slowness for those patients by using process training and moving from the conscious processing to the automatic skill processing, because some of the activity which we are doing every day, it's become like automatic or unconscious. But for those patients with the mental slowness, they cannot reach to this level. So most of the activity, most of the task which they are doing, it's conscious, which means slow. So we need to move from this stage to that stage. So this is about the process training. The other strategy, which is the other approach, which is the strategy training. In the strategy training, now we are aiming to compensate for the lost problem. So the problem or the problem is still exists. We are not gonna improving this skill, but we need to compensate for that problem. And this is, we use it based on our clinical reasoning, our clinical judgment. If we are not expecting improvement in the process training, so we need to move to the strategy training. Also prioritizing the goals. If this skill is important for the patient, so we cannot wait until the skill is improved by using process training. So we just need to compensate it by using maybe equipment, devices, adaptation. In the strategy training, which is considered an important component of the CRT as based to the research, one of the study that they have examined and a big number of the therapists who's doing the CRT about the strategy which they are using, and this study reported that the majority of the therapists was using the strategy training with their patient. So again, the strategy training, we have three components. It might be external. When we talk about external strategy, it's mean like an adaptations and using maybe some equipment, some devices to compensate for the lost function. It might be internal by using internal strategy, like I have maybe problem with the memory, I can use like internal strategy to improve my retrieving and recalling the informations. We have many strategy in the memory, like the first letter cues, using the song, using the words. So this thing, it can consider as internal strategy. It can be environmental by making adaptation in the environment. Let's see some example of this component. This is an example of the external strategy. I'm sure all of you is using the smartphone, sometimes as a reminder, sometimes to alert you something, as to make schedules. So smartphone is highly used, and also the notebook, it can be used. It's considered as an external device or equipment used to compensate sometime for memory loss, for attention impairment, etc. Like an internal strategy, an example of the internal strategy, let's say that you have lost some things and you started to do visual imaginary and to visualize where you lost that thing, to recall where you have put it last time, where you was moving. So this is some internal strategy, something internal, okay, inside you. Again, this is the visualizing something or visual imaginary. So this is considered an internal strategist. We have also the environmental. Whenever we do an adaptation in the environment, so we call it environmental. We can facilitate the some performance of the daily life activity, especially for the patient who has maybe visual spatial problems, or as you see here, by anchoring the lines, anchoring the fingerprints, the footprints, even making some maybe adaptations, the background. So all of this technique, it's considered an environmental whenever we do an adaptation in the environment. So this is about the strategy training. Again, we have the external, we have internal, and we have environmental. The last one, which is the functional activity training, which is considered also very important whenever we work with the patients. Our, again, ultimate goals is improving the patient function, not just improving memory or attention or information processing. Our main aim, our main goals is to be reflected on his or her daily life activities and his or her participations in the community. So remember, none of the three approaches will be particularly useful unless the individual is encouraged to practice the skills learned in their everyday life, and the aim is application of learning in everyday life. So just to remember this home message. And we know all we can use the daily life activities to improve the cognitive skills. At the same time, I can use it to improve the functional skill. An example for that, let's say that I want to take the patient to the supermarket, or maybe doing simulation supermarket. So I can use the supermarket to improve the selective attention. This is one type of the attentions. Like I want the patient to select or to pick particular item in the supermarket with the presence of the distractions, with the noise. And this is considered part of the selective attention. At the same time, I can improve also the marketing skills, like the money management, like also how to deal in the, how to communicates with others in the community. So I can achieve two goals, like improving particular cognitive skills or improving functional skill. So again, functional training is one of the core area of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So this is basically when we talk about the approaches in the cognitive rehabilitation. The last thing which I want to talk about, which is as you remember, when we talk about teaching skills and teaching strategy. So again, we need to think about ourselves as a teacher, not about therapist anymore. You should have good teaching skill in order to deliver and to do cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Some of these teaching skills which you should have as a therapist, you should have bonding, you should do bonding and rapport with the patient. So building rapport with the patient doesn't mean that the patient should be your best buddy or it should be deep relationship. It should be honest and the trust relationship with the patient. The patient should trust you, and when he trusts you, he will do whatever you ask him to do, and he will trust what you say. Maybe at the beginning it will be not comfortable for him to hear from you some of the facts, like about his cognitive impairment, like it might be exist, but at the end he will come back to you and say that you was true with what you said, and it's good that you was realistic with him. So honesty between you and between the patient is very important, the honesty between the therapist and between the patient, because it will be also reflected in all aspects of the treatment. So again, honest and trust relationship between the patient is very important whenever you do cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Another thing, you need to make fun and being motivated. This is very important also, especially in the cognitive rehabilitation area and also in the other area. You need to grade the activity to ensure the success and developing self-confidence. It doesn't mean that the task should be so simple or too complex. It should be appropriate on the patient level. So you should choose the task, and the complexity of the task should be appropriate to the patient level. Not too complex, not too easy. Okay? So you need to ensure the success, but without delivering too easy or too complex activity or task for the patient. Provide long enough duration for practice. Practice is very important, and we have also some of the strategies like spaced retrievals, like also task-specific training, which we use it sometime with the severe cognitive delay, which need a lot of the practice. So you need a lot of the practice. Sometimes you need to practice the task for or the activity for 1 week or for 1 month or for 2 months. So this is the concept of the cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Purpose, functional and clear language. So make sure that your language and the way which you are talking with the patient is very clear. Now, the way which I'm talking with you, I cannot use it with a patient with the cognitive delay or with the patient of low processing, because he will not understand anything. This patient, he will feel that everything is very fast for him. So this way of talking is not appropriate for such patient. So you need to think about what you want to say and how to say, and also the speed of the talking whenever you talk with him is very, very important. Again, whenever you set a goal for the patients, you need to use the SMART goals. Your goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based or bonding. So this is about the goal setting. And we have also some principles and criteria for setting the goals. It's not our scope for this lecture, but remember that your goal, it should be SMART goals. Okay, so this is in general whenever we do cognitive rehabilitation therapy for the patients. Again, this is the teaching skills which you need to have as a therapist. Whenever you do cognitive rehabilitation therapy, you need to look at yourself as a teacher sometime, not as a therapist, and you should have also the good clinical reasoning, good clinical judgment whenever you do any cognitive rehabilitation therapy. Okay, finally, another area or approaches which should be considered. Okay, again, in order to have good cognitive skills, in order to have good attentions, good memory, you need to pay attention also to another area. Good nutrition is very important, and even for us, when I do maybe an intensive task, or maybe like when I teach someone, or when I study something, if I did not maybe take my breakfast or not eat well, so my attentions and my memory will not as the same as when I have good or enough nutrition. Sleeping also is very important, and all of us has faced maybe an situation or circumstances when you did not have good sleeping, that you cannot focus or concentrate in the study or in the sessions or maybe in the lectures, whatever. Again, we need to make a balance with our life, as you see in this circles. So we need to make a balance between all the area in our life: the financials, family, the work, mental, physical, social, spiritual. So we need to make a balance in our life in order to achieve our goals, and all of these things, it gonna reflect a lot in the cognitive performance of the person. Okay, so this is all about the about introductions, principles, criteria of the cognitive rehabilitation. Again, I have tried to summarize it as much as I can. Usually these things take maybe days or weeks to explain it in detail, but at least we have highlighted the important thing. Hopefully my lecture was informative for you, and has valid also to your also experience, and added to you as well. And also I hope it will be reflected in your clinical practice. I would like to thank also the organizers, the people who's organizing these lectures. Thank you all, and have a good night. Thank you.